It's a bright sunny morning here in Appalachia. This is the middle of the Appalachian Mountains. And look how beautiful it is here in the fall. A few weeks ago there would have been leaves on all of these trees and it was just an amazing bunch of colors. Hi, I'm George the Antique Nomad. Come with me as I wander the country in search of valuable vintage, amazing antiques, and cool collectibles. We'll buy, sell, and trade at antique malls, shops, and shows, estate sales, flea markets, thrift stores, anywhere people go to find really interesting things that just aren't made anymore. So come on, let's go! Hey everybody, I'm George the Antique Nomad, and I'm so excited to show you more from this appraisal fair because appraisal fairs in little towns often yield some of the most interesting stuff, and this one is no exception. I got here a little early so I could show you some of the other shopping there is. There is one vendor's mall in town, so let's look at that first and then we'll show you some more appraisals. They have a vendor's mall here. It's not an antique mall per se because it's a fairly small population and a lot of the people just need functional used goods as well. But you will find antiques in here. In fact, one of my viewers, Blue Feather Mercantile, has a space in here that looks really good. Carnival glass, the green Vaseline here, this will glow under a black light. That's 1930s depression, but I like this. This is very orange, pedestal right out of the 70s, $22.50, not a bad price. Here's some silver fade in a caddy, and that's $47.50. And this is part of Blue Feather Mercantile stuff. He sold the big black truck for only $25. What a deal. Indiana, this might do better where I am actually. $3.50. I think I might just have to get that from him. It's got the old school race cars, so we know it has some age. Ms. Pac-Man. So he definitely finds some pop culture stuff around here. Stardust Hotel, that's another one of those Vegas hotels that's long gone. I have to admit I like these red lamps. They are right out of the 70s. And they're so red. Look at this cute old kitchen queen with the round window. You don't see a lot that have this deco style because that's about the time kitchen queens stopped being used in a lot of houses. It's only $125. Oh, and look at this fish planter with the huge lips. This place certainly is big. And there are a lot of newer things, but there are older things if you sort through, and I do have a couple of things at the counter, which is pretty good considering I don't have a lot of time to look. I did all right. And this is also Blue Feather Mercantiles. I noticed that his spaces are a little better organized and I see older stuff in them. These are pretty down here. This nice little set, only $20 with the tray and the water bottles. And then this is a Pyrex pattern that you do not see very often, called Shenandoah. He's only asking $2.99 each on the Moon and Stars goblets. And he's got this very nice large Manhattan serving bowl for $12.99. This is my pattern. It doesn't look like there's any chips on any of the edges, and that's actually a pretty good price. And I think I'm going to take that too. And I had seen in his pictures that he had this Apollo decanter, because I follow him sometimes. Please don't open to protect the cork. Well, that's fine. Cork repaired, but very brittle. Yeah, that can be a problem with these. They do tend to become very brittle. That would be a good thing for my Florida shows, though. These little brass and glass tables for $26 are a good deal. Brass is definitely coming back and they've got sort of a deco revival feel. And then he's got this really neat with the horses. He's got 57 on this. I think it's certainly worth it. I don't know who the maker is. It had a label that is gone. It's not a Sasha Brastoff. And it doesn't have a signature that I can easily tell. But I do really like it. So he's finding some neat stuff in this area, and I'll bet other people are too. We're gonna head on towards Sassy Trash and then the appraisal fair and find out. Oh, cool. Well, how many of you remember these from back in the day? Everybody? Yes. Yeah, these are really beautiful. This is Ellie Smith. Viking Glass also made similar, but theirs didn't have the same patterning.
Viking actually came out with these first. These are called swung bases. They are very, very popular with collectors right now. We're probably at a collecting peak with these. They were really big in the 1960s and 70s. They came in little sizes this big and big sizes. These people had worked there for years and years, and they had this amazing glass blowing skill. And the way that they made these is they were done in a mold, which is why it's a perfect circle on the bottom. It wasn't hand blown. It doesn't have a pontil mark. They'd put it in a mold. The mold was about this big. It had these ribs in it. Then they'd take it out of the mold and they'd hold it while it was still molten hot. They'd hold it with this crimping device upside down, and then they'd swing it back and forth and let it drip. And as long as it got until it started to look like it was going to fall apart, and then they'd turn it back upright, and then they'd cool it down. And so each one is a little different at the top because it's just however far they let it go. So they all are a little different. The bright orange is a really popular color. When I started collecting and buying and selling, these cost about $15 or $20 a piece. Nobody wanted them. They're big, they're orange. This was in the late 80s and the early 90s when everybody wanted pink and, oh, nobody wants orange. And I thought they were cool, so I started buying them. Well, now they're selling, this size should sell for $75 to $100.
Wow.
And there's an even bigger size that go for hundreds of dollars that's like this tall. So it's cool, and it's a great piece. How'd you get it?
I paid $3 for
$3.
it in a junk shop. Yes.
Wow, that's great. There was a time.
Well, I brought you rocks.
Rocks, oh cool. Oh, good rocks.
Okay. So the story here, these have been in my family for 3 generations, possibly 4.
Okay.
My family settled in northern Indiana, southern Michigan. And the story that has been passed down is that there was a particularly brutal winter, and I believe the Potawatomi Indians are from that area.
Yes.
And either my grandparents or their parents allowed them to sleep in the kitchen just to stay alive. And as a thank you memento, they gave them these.
Interesting. That may actually be a true story. It's a great story, and since it's family legend, I have a feeling that there's some truth to it. Usually the stories we're told in family have some connection. Interestingly enough, it seems like the settlers and the native people of that area kind of worked things out and did get along enough. My family, I was born in Michigan and near the Indiana border, Battle Creek, and we had one ancestress who is actually Miami, which is Ojibwe and connected to that. And it was never even thought of as an issue when she married into the family. So apparently it was a little different there.
Many years ago, I spoke to someone and they suggested that perhaps those were used by women to prepare food. It was to separate meat from the bone and, of course, grinding. I think that's accurate.
I think that's not accurate, and I'll tell you why. Grinding stones typically are not as pointed as this. When they start to have a point like this, these are actually axe heads.
Okay.
These were intended to be used to chop through probably wood. It's not that they couldn't have been used for other purposes, but a grinding stone is usually going to be a little smaller. I mean, these barely fit my hand, and if you're talking about a woman grinding, their hands would be even smaller. So it really, and they usually would be shaped a little more for the hand. You can even see where this one's been chipped away a little. And this one's nice because it has obvious wear, because it is easy to fake these. Now, we know they're not fake because they've been in your family forever, but when you go, if you went on the market to try to sell, then you have to be able to say, well, look, you can tell because there's obvious wear, it's worn in the right places. This would have been tied on with straps around some sort of a staff, and so, you know, you would expect to see wear on the high points like it has. So these seem correct. I would say your value on these are probably in the $400 to $500 range each.
Okay.
So they're really cool.
Oh, thank you very much.
Yes. Yes.
I like that.
Yeah, me too. I just like the fact that they've been in the family and stayed, you know.
Whether the story is true or not.
Well, the story is probably, I'm betting the story is mostly true and that they were traded to them for some reason. Now, a lot of people, they would just be plowing the fields and up one of these would come too. So, okay, and your piece.
This piece.
How did you get this?
Tell me who that is. It's her mother-in-law's.
Okay. Very good.
We don't know anything about it. She said it was ivory.
It is definitely ivory. Now, when I hold it to my face, you think, why is he holding it to his face? Well, your fingers get calloused, so it's hard to tell, but if you hold a natural material to your face and it feels cold, you know it's not plastic, because stone and ivory and natural materials hold the cold, and they'll feel colder than room temperature, and it does. It's very nicely carved. What it is it's a net ski originally. It was intended as a net ski. This would have been when they'd wear the big obi, the sashes, they would tie them together, and then these were essentially the buttons that the cord would go through, and they'd pull them together to tie them, and then they'd hang on the sash. At some point, she had them made into a piece of jewelry. This one is really well detailed. It's got nice color. It's got I believe that's a little artist mark on the bottom there. Yes, it is, and it has a signature. Now, the Japanese are a very demure society. You don't really see these pieces being signed like this until the 20th century. So this is something that she got sometime in the 1900s and then had strung on. Now, again, this is newer than this. The style of the necklace looks like something from about 1970, so my feeling is that this netski is probably pre-war, and that she had it added into the piece of jewelry later. The retail value on this for that piece should probably be in the $135, $150 range. The difficulty is that in a lot of states, you're not allowed to sell them anymore because they won't allow you to sell anything made with elephant ivory. So the piece is probably worth in total $300 or $400, but whether you can sell it and get that is really kind of dicey. So that's the good news and the bad news. I would say if you like it, wear it.
No, do they?
Good.
My mother said when she was a little girl, her mother and her grandmother opened a trunk, pulled out, they said Indian cape, and that all these little beads fell off of it. Her grandmother strung them on thread and then crocheted them into that.
Wow, interesting. It's really cute. That's a great story and possibly true, because restringing of these beads was done a lot. These do look like they're old. I was scratching it on the paper to see if it might be jet. Jet is actually coal, but it's coal from England that they made into jewelry. You'll see a lot of it here in Kentucky because back in the Victorian era, when coal started to be a big industry here in Kentucky, a lot of people started wearing jet jewelry from England because it was made from coal, so it became kind of an interesting thing to people. When it's coal, it usually leaves a little residue behind, and I'm not getting that, so I think that these are glass beads. And they could definitely have been Indian trade beads. Of course, that means that they probably were actually from Czechoslovakia originally. So there's a lot of heritage to this that we know and some that we don't. But what's interesting to me is how they did it in this long necklace with the strings down here. My guess is that when they restrung this, it probably was in the 1920s. And the reason I say that is because this is very much like the jewelry that the flappers wore. The flappers really liked long necklaces with lots of things. They liked anything that would shimmy and shake when you danced. So this would have been perfect. And of course, this is right about the time they're inventing the basic black dress, so black jewelry goes with. So my guess is that the work was done in the 20s, even though the beads might be older. It's a nice piece, and if it was jet, it might be $200 or $300, but it does seem to be glass. As glass, it's probably worth somewhere in the $65 to $85 range, I would say.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Yeah,
So
you're
we're
very
not
welcome.
rich.
Well, not rich, but fun stuff.
Very fun.
Yes.
Thanks. That's fun.
And actually, if you can find more of these, they would add up to rich.
Yeah.
We'll be looking for it.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. What's rare about this, it's a buffalo nickel, but this one appears to be a three-legged buffalo. This was a mistake at the mint where they didn't, for some reason the die got plugged up, so when you look at the buffalo, it only has 3 legs instead of 4. Well, they caught that after a day or two, So there were only a handful, maybe a few thousand of these that got out. And because of that, they're very valuable. It was the Denver Mint where that happened. It seems like it all adds up. There have been forgeries of these where they would take a buffalo nickel and alter it and all this kind of stuff, but this doesn't look like that's been the case. Assuming it's legit, which I think it is. One thing that concerns me a little with it is it looks like it may have been cleaned looking at the surface. That might reduce the value some, but they're selling for about $500 now. So what you paid is perfectly fair, and I think it's great. I do not have one of those in my collection. I've been looking for years, and they don't come up often. Well, this is a fellow named Lou Al-Sindor, who to the rest of us is known as Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, but he hadn't changed his name yet. And this was his rookie card. He had just come out of UCLA, and this is 1969. This is the year that he started playing professional basketball. Well, of course, he ended up being one of the greatest players of all time. Rookie cards are more collectible. It's in a slab, but this isn't a graded slab. If it was in a slab that had a grading from a professional sports card company, the gradings actually add value as long as you don't take it out of the slab. But it's still a good idea that it's in one because it keeps it protected. It costs money and it's a hassle, and maybe it's not important to you, but it might be worth having this graded because the grading can really make a difference on the value. Unslabbed and ungraded, the highest value I'm seeing on one of these is one that recently sold for about $3,000. With the grading, depending on how high a grade they give it, there are prices. There's one that was absolutely perfect. Sports cards, they were making them for kids, so they made them fast. They're usually off center a little. They weren't cut quite right. If you have one that's perfectly cut, perfectly centered, perfectly printed, no problems, never been touched, you're looking at $12,000. So I would say you might want to have that one sent off and have it graded. It might be worth your while.
Well, I sure appreciate it.
Thank you. I enjoyed that. It was fun to see those.
Thank you.
I know nothing about it.
Oh, I think these are great. We had a gal in here earlier with a big orange swung vase. Well, this is very similar. This is by a company called Viking Glass. Viking was in West Virginia. This was a line they called Epic. They were originally the New Martinsville Glass Company, and they went out of business during the Second World War because they couldn't get enough material. And when they reformed after the Second World War, they realized that Scandinavian design was starting to be really popular, and they wanted to do something modern. So they came up with a line they called Epic. And they had an American guy from West Virginia design it, but they said make it look like European glass. So it was all very streamlined and smooth. They did a vase that would have been with this up. Instead, they took another tool and they pulled one side down and made a handle out of it and turned it into a U, or two different pieces of glass using essentially the same materials. And so they're really popular. You don't see them very often with the handle, actually. It's usually just the vase. And I just sold this exact same one and I got $50 for it.
Oh, okay.
This is very odd. It is a $50 bill and it's printed correctly on the front. And then on the back, you see the back the way it's supposed to be, but it's so thin, it's like the front has come through the back. It actually got printed double on one side. There's a few things to look for on your bills. If you see a star in the serial number, that means that something got messed up with the sequence at when they were printing. So they put a star in to note that they're out of sequence. And those are actually harder to find. So a star will actually be worth a little more. Another thing to look for, it's so dumb, but it will actually sell for more. If you look at the serial numbers and there's a good poker hand in there, there are still people who play dollar bill poker and it's supposed to be you just take whatever bill you have out of your wallet and whoever has the best poker hand wins, and then somebody buys them around or whatever. Well, what guys will do, it's usually men, is they'll look through the bills and try to find the one with the best poker hand, and then they just happen to have it in their wallet. Misprints typically seem to be selling for 2 to 3 times face value, so it's probably worth $100 or $125.
I'll keep it.
Yes.
Keep it forever. This one also. This one's in little bit rough shape. But it's a large silver certificate.
Ah, yes.
1923, I think it says.
A lot of folks don't realize that dollar bills used to be a lot bigger than they are now. This is 1923, and it's a silver certificate. Back then, we were on the silver standard, and what that meant was if you took this into the bank, you could say, I want $1 worth of silver, and they would specifically give you silver. Well, when we went off the silver standard, that went away, but the silver certificates are still out there, and you don't see these big ones in circulation anymore because everyone can pick those out, but you'll see ones from the 50s and even the 30s in circulation time to time, and they don't sell for a whole lot, but these older ones can. Between about $30 and $50 on these in this condition.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
very
That was
much.
fun.
That's real fun.
Now, this is a good example of a book that has value. And this is going to have value for a few specific reasons. For one thing, anytime you see these big compendiums from the 1800s where it's a whole bunch of different knowledge in a history book, they usually start talking a lot about pioneers of a certain area. And so that makes it collectible in and of itself. And this one is more collectible here because this is the history of Kentucky. How many of you had to study this? This is the history of Kentucky illustrated as of 1886. So there's a whole bunch of really interesting history in Kentucky that hasn't happened yet, but Kentucky is about 100 years old as a state at this point. Kentucky is a very important state in 1886. It is the center of the horse trade. It is the center of a lot of carriage making. We have the beginnings of the coal industry happening in a lot of places, and so this would have been a place full of movers and shakers, and this is a great history book. Now, the condition isn't great, but it could be rebound. It's probably valuable enough to be worth it. A lot of areas around the turn of the century did local histories of the pioneers. Seattle has a book all about Seattle pioneers that came out about 1905. Portland, Oregon's got one. Louisville's got one. So there are definitely things to look for because a lot of people don't like history. And so when they have estate sales, anything that says history, they put in the dollar pile. The only one that I've seen sell recently went for $30. It was completely missing the entire cover. And it sold for $30 for just the innards. My guess is that in this condition, this is probably $75 to $100. If it was in really stellar condition, it could be as much as a couple of $100s. So when you go to old house sales and you see old history books, once you get back to this era, they're definitely worth looking at.
I brought some Pokemon cards,
Cool.
and these are all the normal ones that I got from this. But the reason I brought this is that I noticed a few misprints in these three. This has an extra cloud up here that isn't on any of the other Ponyta cards I've had, and these two have a couple of ink misprints.
Excellent. Well, this is really interesting to see because Pontia and actually a whole lot of things from Pokemon are definitely very collectible now, and one of the things to look for is exactly what you're saying, is misprints. Have you looked into these at all?
I tried looking to them, and I mostly noticed letter misprints seems to be the most common.
Yes.
And I couldn't find anything about the ink misprints, but considering I've had like 20 at my house that have these, I'm not sure what they mean.
Yeah, I think the ink print misprints are a little more common. It's a more common thing that can go wrong in the process, but I think the one that could really be money is where you have an extra cloud in the background. Those are the things that I've noticed with these, and I'm not expert in these because it really is an area of its own. But I've noticed that a lot of times, like, for example, there was a Pikachu that came out in 1999 and they didn't put the shadow behind it. And that one can be, I see you've got some there.
I think these are one of them. It's one of these two. I know these are the first edition, and then these are the other.
The other,
Pikachu.
yes, exactly. There are a lot of subtleties. For example, if they have red cheeks, that's worth a lot more money. The more glaring the error or the more noticeable the change, the more valuable they are. So, like if they accidentally printed part of it upside down, those are worth a ton. I mean, those can be worth $2,000 or $3,000. Whether I can tell you what you really need to know about these, you may need to actually talk to someone who's specifically a card guy. Some of the ones that are more unusual, you might consider sending to a grader because, of course, the condition is going to make a big difference as well. I mean, a gem mint on one of these is going to be $100, even if it's regular. I mean, I see one that is, it is first edition like this, and it doesn't have the shadows. And it seems to have the extra cloud, and one sold in England for $90. Card for Collector's Hatcher Collection. Okay, this artifact is part of the Ming porcelain cargo of a Chinese trading vessel which sank circa 1640. Was discovered and salvaged in 1983 outside Malaysia and was sold at Christie's Amsterdam. It is from the transitional Ming period, 1620 to 1640. Well, okay, let's take a look and see if that all adds up. Well, it's got a mark on it. And the interesting thing, and this is a Ming Dynasty mark. Now, one thing that they'll tell you when you're appraising and learning about Asian art and artifacts is that reproductions are not a new thing. In the Qing Dynasty, they reproduced Ming Dynasty stuff, and they used a similar mark, but it's not the same mark they used in the Qing Dynasty, so that's what they call mark in period. I'm not expert enough to tell you for certain, so we have to use what you were given and assume that they knew what they were talking about and that this is mark in period, in which case it is Ming Dynasty rather than a later piece. And I would say that the chances are good. When you look at it, you'll notice it does have a crack, but it doesn't have a lot of flaws in it. You usually think with Chinese porcelain, you'll see little specks because a lot of it was fired over wood. So when you have a campfire and the wood crackles and pops and little cinders come out, well, you usually see little cinders and things. But back in the Ming Dynasty, most of the production was for very, very wealthy people, and they were very careful to control those things. Later years, they were making for everybody. So the fact that this one actually doesn't have a lot, it's got one little brown mark, which I believe is an ember that came through, but it doesn't have a lot. So this was made better quality. My assumption is that what you're being told on this card is about correct. I have to be honest, I'm not sure how they could say that it was 1620 to 1640, that specifically. Not very many people realize that the Polaroid camera that was so efficient to make your nice, easy, they print right now pictures with. Yeah. This is how big they were when they came out.
Yeah,
you just pull. Oh, yep, there you go, just like that. Yeah, so this was your Polaroid camera, and it had to be this big because you had to put the big plate film in the back. I mean, this thing weighs about 10 pounds, and with all the wet film in it, about 15 or 20, so it was a bit of a job. And then there was a giant flash you could attach to it that was just about as big. And these are actually selling now. Oh, and it works. Hey, that's great.
Yeah, it works.
Like the internet, it became widely adapted because people could show pictures that they didn't want everyone else to see on it. And so they became really, really popular in the early 1960s especially. And now people are starting, then it became kind of obsolete because, you don't need that old plate process. So everybody threw them all away.
Yeah.
And because everybody threw them all away, now the ones that are left like this are selling for about $50 a piece.
Yeah. Well, I know we got a lot of old photos of my mom and dad. They always got the little white strip across the bottom.
Yep.
And they're in black and white.
And they're in black and white.
This is what they've come from.
That's right. Yep. And I remember when I was a kid, they'd print the date on it
On the
for
back.
a couple of years, and then people hated that because then they're like, oh, I don't want to admit I'm that old now, so they quit putting the date on it. I sold one for $50 a month ago, and I just bought another one because they do go.
Yeah.
People like them.
Okay. All right. I appreciate
Very
it.
cool. Thank you.
you.
People definitely like old cameras now, so if you've got one sitting around that you were going to throw away because nobody uses that kind anymore, think twice about it. Hello.
Hello. It's from 1984. They won the World Series.
Oh, yeah, and this is Detroit, and this is the entire team, isn't it?
Yeah.
Wow, very cool. So it's a Detroit Tigers baseball, and it is signed by everybody. And that's pretty neat because usually when you talk to baseball collectors, a lot of them want one signature of their favorite player in the sweet spot, and that's all they want. But when you're looking at a championship team, you want everybody. So this is about as good as it gets. And I mean, there's some pretty notable people on here. My favorite is seeing Sparky Anderson's signature right on there. I've got a friend who grew up in Detroit, and he would kill to have your baseball. How did you get it?
My uncle worked in air conditioning at Tiger Stadium.
Oh, really? He was HVAC at the stadium, so he actually got to see the games?
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
how cool. Well, I want to take a look because I did a baseball appraisal recently, but they didn't have this one. I'm going to tell you the same thing I told the guy with the Lou Alcindor card. It seems really silly. We know this is authentic. We know where it came from. If you ever went to sell it, you should probably, which I don't think you will, but if you ever decided to sell it, you should probably send it to a grading service to have a certificate of authenticity put with it, because for some reason in the sports collectible world, they want a certificate. Even if everybody knows what it is and where it came from, if it has a piece of paper saying that some expert looked at it and said that's what it was, it's worth more money. But I think that you're probably looking at, $500 to $700 probably is a price range, and I think it'll become more valuable. 1980s baseball is just now starting to get far enough back in time where people who were kids at that time are interested in their heroes.
Yeah.
And that always kicks it up another notch. That's why the stuff from the 60s right now is really, really expensive.
Right.
And so I think it's going to go up in value, and it's really cool.
All right. Thanks.
Thank you. Neat to see. And great stories. I love hearing that something came. I mean, I love collecting, so it's great when you find something in the store and you buy it and it's yours and you love it. But I think it's really cool when you hear that it came from a family member and they had a direct connection to this event that this was connected to. That just sort of gives it an extra level to me.
Hey everyone, I just wanted to take a quick break and thank you for watching this video. If you're enjoying it, please give it a thumbs up and leave a comment. Also, please do subscribe, because then you can click that bell to be notified of future videos. We have membership packages. There's a couple of different levels. We appreciate the support of our super fans who help us do extra bonus content. You can check that out by hitting the join button below or clicking the link in the description. And lastly, we want to ask you to check out our new channel, the Antique Nomad Live. That's live with an exclamation point, where we're doing additional content of a live nature, hauls, sales, bonus stuff. We'll have a lot of fun there too. So check us out here on the Antique Nomad and also on the Antique Nomad Live. Now let's get back to this video.
It is a tree
During
fossil.
the Carboniferous period,
Oh.
300 to 320 million years ago,
Wonderful.
right before Jurassic. The state was covered in a bog with trees. I've got several pieces. We find those in coal mines. They stick out like a sore thumb, and all of the limestone, that's the trunk. The leaves were tiny little things. And I forgot the name, but it was a palm.
It was a palm.
Yeah.
Okay. Wow.
Yes.
That is wonderful. Well, this is one of these times when, sometimes when you're an appraiser, and sometimes you punt and you hope someone else knows, and that was fantastic. I learned something today.
I forgot the tree, but it's from the Carboniferous period. So
That is terrific. This is part of why I like doing appraisals, because I learn something every time. So what he's told us, and you folks who live around here have probably seen these in this case. This is new to me. So he said this is from a palm tree, Carboniferous period. So that's going to be back in
40 to 300, I think.
300 million. And it's just amazing. And I'm so glad that you were here, because I would have been able to.
I thought it was a fish too.
I thought fish scale, exactly. But now it makes sense, because now that you look at it like a palm tree, you've got the different bands and you've got the striations. It makes perfect sense. And I knew that Kentucky, because of the, where I'm from in Washington State, believe it or not, is the only place in Washington State that also has coal. And it's because it was bog, just like that. So the same story and all of that, but we don't have any of these fossils there. Well, now that we know that, I'm going to see if we can find a value for you, but thank you very much. That was really interesting. All right, so a little piece about the size of one of these rings recently sold for $40. So if we figure based on size and interest, you're probably looking at $300 to $400 potentially in a good lapidary shop that sold such things, and it's just wonderful. I'm so glad you brought it when he was here.
Yeah.
Well, that was interesting, and that was another example of where an appraisal is an opinion of value, and sometimes we need multiple opinions, so I'm really glad we had someone here who could help us identify that. Hello.
Hi. How are you?
Good. How are you doing?
Well, we're good.
Well, this is pretty, and where did you get it?
Well, so I had to text Mom because I didn't know this was going to be so formal. So this is hers, and she got it from her sister out of North Carolina, and her sister bought it at a yard sale.
Oh, very cool. Okay. And I imagine that if it came from a yard sale, she maybe didn't pay too much.
No.
Now, this is not wildly old. When you look at the bottom, the felt pads could have been added at any time, but the felt pads have kept it from having any wear at all. So we know it doesn't have a lot of age, but it's still a nice piece. And what it is it's Chinese, and it's a glaze that they refer to as, well, it's actually two things. This originally was celadon, this green that you see coming through is a celadon glaze, but then they coated it with something they call sang de boeuf, which is basically blood of beef. It's basically to look like cow's blood or ox blood or that sort of thing. And it's a really popular color for them to use in design, and it goes from this deep red into these purples here. And then they did it over a celadon green, so that's why you have the green coming through. And the reason they do this is because they are trying to make it look like it's something really, really old. And so they're taking two things that are popular in ancient Chinese ceramics and mixing them into one piece now that has a big form that's really stylish and interesting looking, and that's what you end up with. So it's a nice piece. It's not a wildly old piece, so the value right now is mainly as a decorative item. And, if you had this in a store that sold this kind of thing, there's a lot of antique stores that mix new and old and are, more about setting up your house than collecting old things. If you had it in one of those stores, say in Louisville or Cincinnati or a bigger city, you'd probably see it priced over $100 because it's big and substantial.
These here, at one time used to be worth somewhere up to $1,000 with appraisals, but eventually McDonald's printed out the newer versions of these exact same cards, and since then they've plummeted in price.
That is a big problem, is that sometimes the one that did the most horrible thing was actually the Postal Service. They put out a stamp and it was an error. They had like half of the color was missing, and the collectors all grabbed it, and it was worth several $100s. So then they just started printing them that way on purpose as a different type, and they destroyed the collector market for it. And that's one thing that's a little scary about these, is that they can come out and produce a bunch more anytime. So my feeling about Pokemon cards is if you have a fun collection, if you have stuff that's kind of normal value, keep it. If you have something that's really, really, really valuable, if you find out, I would say this would be the time to sell and keep the money aside. If you really love it, you'll probably buy it back cheaper later. Oh, these are pretty. Oh, and a good company too.
Do you name more?
No, a couple will give us the idea. These are Royal Worcester. They're marked on the back, and it's funny, they even say coaster in case you didn't know what to use it for. Royal Worcester has this crazy mark on the back, is them, and then it says Royal Worcester underneath. It's like Worcester sauce, the way they spell it. But they were a very good high-end porcelain company that only went out of business about 10 years ago. They've been around since the 1790s. These are going to date to about the 1960s, and they're all hand-painted, and they actually would use enamel, so it's got that raise, that beading. That's enamel paint, which is basically, it's paint and glass mixed together real finely, and then when they fire the piece, the glass melts, and that's why you have the beads. So that's why there's texture there. And that makes them a little more special. And they seem to be selling for about $40 for the set. So they're pretty nice.
Thank you.
You're welcome. My advice, I know everybody, because they come to an appraisal fair, they're all hung up on value, value, value. Is it famous? Is it famous? Buy what you like and love
exactly
it.
What we
And someday you might end up with a pleasant surprise. Somebody became famous. Everybody else likes it too. But it doesn't even matter because it's for you to enjoy. So I get really frustrated when I hear art people be very snobby about, well, that's only good because, and it's like, no, it's only good because you put a high dollar on it.
Right.
It doesn't mean I like it.
Yeah.
15 and 16 will be next. Right, it's not heavy, which is great about these. Tell me what you know about this.
I have nothing. It belonged to my husband's grandma.
Husband's grandmother. Okay. Well, these are a very specific type of a wicker, and this is a company called Lloyd's Looms. These were made in the Carolinas, and they were very popular in the 1920s. And because this particular maker, and I can tell by the color of the finish, this was their finish, and also they did these bands. It wasn't wrapped like up the thing, it's like bands and bands and bands. And so it took a lot of extra weaving for them to do, and so they're very tight. And compared to a lot of wicker, they're very sturdy. And they always would do a wooden top table, so you actually had a good surface. So they were better quality when they were new, and they are more collectible now because of it than other wicker. There was a recent sale of a sofa that went for $450 plus shipping. I think this table, I have a friend who deals in this stuff. He's originally from the Carolinas, and he goes to the Carolinas, buys this stuff up, drags it out to the West Coast, and sells all of it because they don't see it out there. And he would price this probably around $250 to $275. So you've got a good one.
Well, I started to give it away.
Aw,
Yeah.
well, good. I'm glad you kept it.
Okay, thank you so much.
Yeah, if you give it away, they should do something very nice for you.
It's like on when you watch antiques.
Well, I hope somebody leaves here rich and
I just brought stuff I like.
good.
It's not rich and famous or anything like that.
That's okay. Collecting should be about what you like.
Moms, my dad brought them to her
Aw.
from World War II when he came back. And I just want to know if they're real.
Okay,
I
well,
brushed them on my teeth, and they're rough. They feel rough.
they feel rough.
Yes.
That's a good sign. And the other thing we do
The
is, like I
color
did
is
earlier,
different.
is the color is different, but pearls can be a lot of different colors, and they also can be dyed. Yes, these are real. Okay, I feel the cold now.
It's probably because they've been in
I think it was because they were in your
pouch.
pocket in the pouch. Yeah, they were a little warm, but no, they are real. It's a cute little choker, and you said your dad was he stationed in Japan?
Hong Kong,
Hong
and
Kong,
Korea.
and Korea. Okay. Well, these are likely to be Japanese, even if they came from those other places. And they are graduated, meaning they go from the small to the bigger. When you measure by the entire length. So if this is roughly 8 inches, that makes this a 16-inch choker. It's got a nice little silver filigree for the clasp, and it's definitely a 1940s era catch, so everything you said is right. Pearls are not as valuable as they used to be. Usually what happens with pearls is pearls usually come back into style every 4 years because the first lady wears them at the inauguration night, and then everybody decides they need pearls, and then they put them away for 3 years, and then there's another inauguration and they wear them again. Well, when Melania Trump became the first lady, she liked white dresses and no jewelry. It was the first time that a first lady hadn't worn pearls to the inaugural, and pearls did not get the bump that they usually get as a result. Having said that, I still think it's a really pretty set. I would price them around $100 if I had them. I sold a set similar. I had them priced at $100, and it was a favorite customer of mine, and I think I took a $25 discount and sold a very similar set for $75 last year. So somewhere in that range, but they're real.
Thank you.
Well, this is a nice long necklace, and the big question on value of this is going to be whether it's gold or whether it's not. Now, gold until 1915 oftentimes wasn't marked with the carat weight, but after 1915 it usually is. In fact, it had to be by law. And the weights are generally marked up the clasp. So we're looking to see if it has any marks, and it does. It has a mark that says BMNY, which is BM New York. That is actually a jewelry designer. And then you look at the back, and it has a number, and it's 24K GP. Well, 24 karat is almost pure as far as gold goes, which would be very exciting, except GP means gold plated. So if you see gold-plated, gold-filled, it means that it's not solid. It means it's just a casing. And the thing is that it's such a thin casing that you can't really get it off without it burning off, so it doesn't give it extra value. So it really is just a nice gold chain.
Okay.
And probably a $25 or $30
Okay.
gold chain at that.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Well, this is Verbot. This is by Tomy, and this was one of the first programmable toy robots, and you could make it do 6 different things. Let's see what it says it does. It blinks and smiles. It goes forward and reverse. It picks up and delivers objects. It could be trained to be your mechanical messenger. And you can program a secret command so that only you can make it do all of those good things. So this is early 80s. It was $49.99 when it was new. I mean, this stuff was expensive because the robot craze, when it really hit in the early 80s, was a big deal. Well, it turned out that $49.99 wasn't a bad price to pay for these, because now, again, I was talking about how generations want their toys back. Well, that generation of kids is collecting its toys again in earnest, and they're older and they've got money to do it. And anything that's a robot, it looks like it's complete. I'm sure it probably still works. This is worth somewhere in the $130 to $150 range, you can tell your friend.
I will tell.
So it was a good thing to keep.
He actually, he's a contractor, and he had done some work for someone, and then they wasn't able to pay, and they paid him
They
with the
paid
robot.
him with the robot. Well, that's
So,
actually a pretty good,
I
he
think
might
he
have
done
come
pretty
out.
good.
Yep, exactly.
About 50 pounds.
Yeah, that looks like it. Now, how did you get this?
Out of the mountain.
Found it in the mountains somewhere?
Yeah.
Carved and everything like this? Interesting. Was it at some old homestead, or did you
That's
see?
behind my house.
Behind your house, okay. And do you know any, have you had the property a long time, or know anything about the people who were there?
Yeah, I've had it about 15 years.
It wasn't on our property, it was on the mountain.
On the mountain behind, yeah. It's really interesting, and the carving is really cool. It's obviously supposed to be a snake, but the question is, why would they have done it and when? Stonework can be tricky this way because, you know, once you've carved it, it pretty much looks the same, and it doesn't really age or change a whole lot.
You know the writing on it, what kind of language that is?
It actually looks Greek, and my guess is that they did it based on something they saw, you know, like an illustration or something, and thought it was interesting and thought they would go and carve it. The big question is who? You know, I mean, this is the sort of thing people did in their free time because, you know, before you had music and radio and video games and all the distractions we have now, you know, people did this because it was art and it expressed something. So my guess is that it's probably 100 years old and was done by somebody up there who just thought it was a neat design, wanted to do something with their time. It would definitely have value as a collectible and an artistic statement, but I don't read that language to be able to tell you what it's actually trying to say. It's going to value more as something that somebody would think was cool and use in a garden or for art like that. And I mean, if I had it, I'd probably put $150 on it just because it's a big, substantial piece of stone with an interesting design. But I can't tell you more about that design, but I'll bet it's out there somewhere if you could do the research. So that's my suggestion if you have a way to do that, to try to find out more about it.
Could you put like a clear coat over it or something to,
Would it
to
bother
make it
the value?
shine?
It's not that you couldn't coat it in something. I wouldn't, though, honestly. I'd leave it alone. Because unless you've got this right under something where water is hitting it all the time and it's getting a lot of stuff, it's not going to wear real fast at all. It'll outlive our lifetime and then some. I think it's really cool. I wish I could tell you more, but that maybe will give you a lead anyway.
All right, thank
We'll
you.
do some more research.
Yep, exactly. Yeah, that's the thing, you know, when we do these appraisal fairs, the first glance we can send you in a direction, but we can't always tell you everything we need to know yet.
We appreciate it.
Hey, you're welcome. Thank you.
This monstrosity right here.
Oh, yeah. These are fun.
On behalf of my brother. He sent that from Corbin, Kentucky. And he purchased that at a Goodwill in Muncie, Indiana about 10 years ago.
Yep, and he paid $6.99. It's a cool piece. It looks old, but it's more of a fantasy item. And there are a lot of fantasy items like this that start being made in the 70s, because that's when collecting starts really There were always antique collectors and antique shops, but the real big interest where a lot of people started collecting was in the 1970s, partly because, you know, times were hard, society was changing really fast, people were looking for nostalgia, but also because there was a lot of inflation and people wanted to buy things that they thought would hold their value, so they started buying antiques. And then other people saw it and thought it was cool, couldn't afford the antiques, but they could afford something like this. So this is going to be 1970s or early 80s. It probably was not cheap new. It probably sells now for about what it sold then, which would be, you know, somewhere in the $75 range.
Okay.
How'd you get this piece?
My mom and dad are big art collectors up and antiques and all that. And my husband collected plug bottles. So my mom said, here's one for you.
Yeah. Yeah, this is great. It is a plug bottle. The seam actually continues to the top, so we know it's Depression glass era rather than Victorian.
Right.
Because they didn't seam all the way to the top back then. It's a neat one, and people are really owl crazy again. The 70s collecting is back, and owls were popular in the 70s, but they were also popular in the 30s, and they were also popular in the late Victorian time. And the wise old owl, the whole point of the wise old owl was basically, they came up with it in the Victorian times, and it was a way to basically get kids to sit still and listen and not talk. That was the whole theory of the wise old owl.
It doesn't work nowadays.
No, it didn't work on me either. But I think it's really neat. And this guy, he should sell for, I usually see prices around $85 on that particular bottle.
Cool.
And then the big guys. And this one's great because it's got a clock in it. So when I say they were popular in the 70s, this is a perfect example. It's got owls, it's got mushrooms, it's got frogs. It has every 70s motif that was popular all in one. And it's got a clock to boot. So it's one of these things. When this was new, my dad would have loved this. And my mom would have told him he could put it in the garage where she didn't have to look at it. But nowadays, people think this is really fun. It's kitsch. And I bought this exact same one and was excited because I only paid $35, and I think it's worth about $135. So there you go.
Well, my daughter's wanting to sell it, and I said, I'll find out for you, honey.
Yeah.
You don't get ripped off.
Nope. I think she could get that much for it, but she'd probably have to ship it, and it's heavy. So
Yeah.
Well, it has just been so much fun to bring this appraisal fair to you. It was great to meet the people up in Harlan. I am excited because I bet there's even more. I think we can do this again. I'm looking forward to doing these in more little towns across the United States because little towns have big collectibles, as we found out there. We will go on more appraising and antiquing adventures. We will see you again soon. Bye-bye now. Thanks for joining me again in the fun and fascinating antique community here where online meets the real world. Please click the subscribe button below. Click the bell to be notified when new videos upload. Leave a comment below and hit thumbs up to like this video. Links to our online social media daily posts and our items for sale are in the description. This is George at the Antique Nomad. Bye for now.